Mr. Kotak, welcome to the show and many congratulations for winning the BT Best Bank's Lifetime Achievement Award, which I must say was the easiest decision the jury could have taken, given your tremendous contribution to the world of banking and finance and nation building in that sense. I would like to start off this interaction by first asking you, from your family business and from the family end, how did it strike you to just get onto this entrepreneurship bandwagon and set up what is a massive banking footprint today?
Saurav, I am a product of India's financial sector reform. And at a point of time when I started my career, we were just beginning to see the first signs of potential reform. And therefore, we were still in a closed economy, a controlled economy in the early to mid 80s. And it was a great time to find areas and spots which could really be transformed over a period of time. And I was fortunate to find many of those examples in a very, very imperfect financial market. And credit to India, its practitioners, its policymakers, its reformers across the last 35 to 40 years that we have seen such a significant change in the landscape of India.
But which moment do you consider, the turning point in your entrepreneurial journey? Was it the 85 when you entered the BFSI segment away from your family business, or getting a banking license in 2003?
I think when I look at, I call turning points as Agni Parikshas. So starting a business was relatively the easy part. The important turning points in the journey from say 1985 to 2023, which is roughly 38 years, I think the turning points really were 1992 when you saw a significant challenge to India's financial sector. You saw the famous securities scandal, and we survived that, we lived through that and came out completely unscathed. You then saw the significant Asian crisis and the NBFC crisis, which happened between 97, 98, all the way up to 2002, 2003. At that stage, we were a non-bank financial company. There were more than 4,000 NBFCs and barely, I think, around 20 survived. So that was another very important moment where you then came to the conclusion that if you did the right thing, which was within the law of the land, it always worked for you, and there was enough ability to be creative and at the same time within the framework. So that's something which worked for us, and that was another important moment. Then of course we applied for a banking license, which we got in 2003, which was another important moment in our journey. And thereafter in 2014-15, we actually acquired ING Vysya Bank in an acquisition and a merger where ING, a global bank, had a 44% stake, and we folded that into Kotak. And along the ways, I think there are many, many areas which were big learnings for us. Our joint venture partnership with Goldman Sachs, with Ford Credit, with Old Mutual in the life insurance business. And I'm a great believer that it is important for Indian companies to learn and implement and really thereafter execute well. Of course, the major transformation from here on is how will customer centricity, risk management and technology play together.
Mr. Kotak, it's important you talk about companies. We'll come to that a bit later. Before you set up your bank, you were one of the star investment banking names in the entire corporate firmament. At which time did you realize that investment banking is fine and you've done KMFL and all of that, and then you need to then take the next big step to setting up a bank?
See, finally the financial sector has two models. One is saver and borrower, which is the banking and the NBFC model. The second model is investor and issuer, which is markets, asset management, investments, treasury. All those are the investor issuer model. Now, as customers change between saver to investor at a flick of a button. You may decide to put money in a bank deposit versus a mutual fund. So actual customers are doing what is right for them and moving between these two models. But the financial sector structure separates the two. For example, in the saver-borrower model, which is the banks and the NBFCs, they are more under RBI's regulation. The capital market side is more under SEBI's regulation. But you therefore have to keep in mind that what is your customer's need. Therefore, our making the changes was linked to what the customers wanted. And there is another very important thing which I would like to share, what I see as a phenomenal transformation of Indian capital markets. I still remember in the late 80s, most Indians were told putting money in shares is a bad word, or sattebaji hai. And then of course in the 90s, when Indian companies needed to raise capital, they had to go overseas, and we used to have GDR issues which were listed in a relatively unknown exchange called the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. And we did not have a mechanism for foreign institutional investors to be able to invest in primary issues in India. And then I remember in the early 2000s, some of us going and talking to SEBI and saying that whatever GDRs can do, it can be done on the Indian Stock Exchange platform. So we had the whole development of the QIP market. And I'm very happy to say that from a situation where we were all very concerned that Indian capital markets are getting exported, we are now seeing a very robust market where the saver, a nation of savers, has become more and more a nation of investors. And this transformation is phenomenal, but it comes with its challenges. And I think we must nurture this, because the intermediation cost of the investor issuer model is significantly lower than the intermediation cost of the saver borrower model. However, the investor issuer model comes with its own challenges and needs a lot of guardrails as well. So that's part of the journey from here.
And Mr. Kotak, you talked about the challenges Indian economy faced in the last 30-40 years. And despite these challenges, the Kotak Group has given a compounded annual return of 38 to 40%. And what's the risk management philosophy of the group? If you can throw some.
Some very important home truths. First principle from the day we started, I had the advantage of a mentor called Mr. Sidney Pinto. He was a company secretary and a lawyer. And his first message was, whatever you do must be within the framework of law. So that was the first guiding principle in terms of whatever we did. So we started with bill discounting. And the bill market scheme under RBI's guidelines was something which was encouraged. So we followed that scheme which RBI had sort of encouraged. It was a post and Narsimhan committee report. Therefore, the first important point is be creative, but ensure that you're within the framework of law. The second important point, which is a home truth at Kotak, if something is too good to be true, it is. Okay, and therefore don't necessarily chase it. Okay. Third is if you lend money, make sure you can recover it. And fourth is a relentless focus on risk-adjusted returns. Price your risk. Build a deep culture of risk-adjusted returns, because it is other people's money. Banking is all about other people's money. And in the capital markets, extremely important to ensure that you have a very strong model taking care of your customers, whether it is issuers or investors. So following some basic home truths are the core to successful institution building.
And anything Kotak Group can learn from, let's say, JP Morgan. I mean, I was looking at the 153-year-old history. Initially, the family nurtured the institution, that it was passed on to professionals. Anything Kotak can learn?
I think it's about having a much broader perspective. I have always believed an institution is more important than an individual. And institutions must go on forever. Individuals may come and go. And that is a core philosophy I deeply believe in. And that's what we are really working on.
But Mr. Kotak, one important thing you had said earlier at some place, I remember, that this is a given, this governance, because your name is there at the bank. The bank carries your name. How important was it in deciding that, you just can't go wrong in any of these governance issues?
So if you go back to the history of successful financial institutions, whether it's a JP Morgan or a Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or a Merrill Lynch, which is now of course part of Bank of America, all these were family names, started by individuals and families. Most of the individuals are gone, but the institutions have remained. And therefore, when you're putting your name on the line, you're saying, I'm ready to commit my reputation to this institution. And that's what we did day one. Now, of course, the brand Kotak belongs to the institution. And it is extremely important for the board and the management to nurture and protect the brand and reputation over everything else.
The other thing which you have done also, Mr. Kotak, other than setting up the bank and your deep impact on the financial services sector, is also a push for governance. I mean, you've worked with SEBI, you have done a lot of work which are today the norm in terms of how companies should function. What are your thoughts currently on how the governance structure in India has moved?
I had the privilege of chairing the SEBI Committee on Corporate Governance in 2017, and we put a lot of things in place. And on governance, my view is substance is more important than form. And what I'm very happy about is that our entire focus of that report and subsequent approach to governance has been primarily on substance over form. What we have to be careful about the future is how do you ensure that this does not become from substance to too much form, where ticking the box, dotting the I's and crossing the T's becomes more important than underlying substance of running a company. And the principle of governance is very simple. You're running the firm for the interest of all stakeholders. And as long as you don't have a single owner with 100%, you have broader stakeholders than one. And it is your duty to take care of interests of all the stakeholders. And this is the core to governance principles. And what we have to be careful is we don't start believing that operational detail overrides the substance of governance. And that's extremely important as we build out governance for the future.
And coming to the bank, sir, I mean, before you step down, you initiated a transformative, exercise there where, making Kotak a more technology-centric, bank. Could you share more detail?
So we have made a whole host of changes at Kotak in the immediately post-COVID period. We got in a new chief technology officer with global experience, a gentleman called Milind Nagnur, and he joined us in 2022. We also got a very senior resource for customer experience and consumer technology called Bhavnish Lathia. We have got a head of retail risk who once upon a time used to work with Bajaj Finance, and then a gentleman called Bhaskar. We have got a new head of marketing and now focused on the consumer called Rohit Bhasin from Hindustan Unilever. So a lot of changes were made at that stage, and subsequently, of course, there has been a new head of HR also who has joined. So a whole host of changes have been made, and of course, we have a new CEO. So the bank is ready to ensure that we have a good mix between change, stability and continuity.
Even as you did that, Mr. Kotak, there's a lot of talk about how Kotak Bank is known for loyalty of its top deck, particularly, and in fact that's something the jury also discussed, that how people have stayed on with Kotak and grown. That has been one of the big stories of Kotak. What is the secret sauce? What makes people stay for decades with you?
I genuinely feel a company is like a joint family. So when I was born in a home with 63 family members and one kitchen. So the concept of living with family, cousins, uncles, aunts, how do you make sure that you live together, at the same time you pursue your own goals and interests. And a lot of Kotakites started with strong middle class values, and that really kept us all together. We didn't start as high flying. Kotak 1985 was a startup in today's world, and we started in a bootstrap manner, raised a little bit of capital, a total of 30 lakhs. Therefore, the whole concept of entrepreneurship was at the core of who we are. And we combined that with the need for professionalism. And we actually coined the phrase professional entrepreneur. And that is something which we deeply believe in, and that is seeped into the culture.
So this is the time, we have seen some hiring, if I use the word massive hiring at the, or lateral hires, some of them are, non-bankers. Do you see that as a big challenge now, the people challenge?
No, people is a continuing exercise. It has to be worked on both. And as you get, it's a little bit like think about the multiple tributaries and rivers which flow into a sea. So you have different kinds of waters coming in. At the same time, the mainstream river also continues to grow. And I think about this as a constant manthan, a churn which has to happen within the sea for reinventing it for the future. And that at the same time, I would like to categorically say that we also continue to deeply value continuity and commitment, and culture is the key to our future.
And so do you think Mr. Vaswani is in a much better footing? Because if I look at the succession at other private bank where the CEO or the person who laid the foundation left, but here you are there to guide him. So do you think he's in a much better footing?
So Mr. I think I must say that we are very, very enthused with the choice of the CEO the board has made. And Mr. Ashok Vaswani comes with the full support and the backing of the board. He has now spent just below about 2 months from the time he has started. And the board continues to be very, very happy, enthused, and fully supports Mr. Vaswani as he builds his journey within the bank.
In terms of the banking environment, Mr. Kotak, what are the key challenges you see? I mean, there were those days when you would actually see, say, private bank being in trouble and RBI having to have guardrails. And I remember the Bimal Jalan days, for instance, and Dr. Reddy, all of those. Today, the situation, yes, you have also sort of helped in another big banking or institutional failure where you had to help and bring them back, which you did so well. What are the key challenges you think in today's world a banking institution needs to keep in mind?
So, first of all, I would like to compliment the RBI, SEBI, IRDA, and all MCA, all the regulators and the government in general for really navigating the India financial sector ship so beautifully in the post-COVID period in particular. When COVID hit us, we were all extremely worried, but I must compliment the regulators and the government for really steering the ship to a much stronger position that we are. However, fundamentally, financial sector is a high leverage sector, and therefore you can never lower your guard. At the same time, India has aspirations for a 30 trillion economy by 2047. So the financial sector also has to be a significant engine for our growth. So it is a constant navigation between appropriate regulation, risk management, and growth aspiration for practitioners, regulators, and the government.
And so we all know the kind of return you have generated for the group as a CEO. Do you have similar expectation from Mr. Vaswani and the new management team in the next 10, 20 years?
No, I think at the end of the day, the responsibility for boards and management is to produce sustainable returns to its shareholders and stakeholders, while ensuring that you're taking care of broader interests of the planet, like sustainability, taking interests of obviously depositors. If the returns to shareholders come, that's coming after the interests of depositors are protected. And therefore, like any other company, all banks and financial institutions are generally listed. And therefore, you have an obligation, in addition to, say, depositors, to produce shareholder returns. I mean, otherwise, capital, you need capital for your growth. And if India has to meet its aspiration, there will be continuing need of capital. And we need to sustainably grow this, and keeping in mind that it is always an exercise in risk management, customer centricity, and now powered by technology.
Mr. Kotak, you've often said, talking about the 30 trillion aspiration, 2030 aspiration of for India. What are the key challenges you see along the way? Because you've often spoken about concentration of wealth at the top in terms of both the companies, the bigger companies, and you've said, I want 1 million entrepreneurs to bloom. Now, how does that sort of get, because there is a lot of stress at the MSME end, people still talk about consumption and rural stress. What are your thoughts on this?
So first of all, I must congratulate the large corporates for really getting to scale and making India participate in some of the large things which are happening around the world. For example, telecom being the lowest cost producer and getting to scale, or airlines. So the scale has come because of the large players. However, I do believe that in addition to large players, India needs many flowers to bloom. And I would be a strong advocate that we need to have a good solid policies and a free and fair competition policy as well, which makes sure that we grow in a manner which is consistent with the broader interests of the larger society.
Do you think there is, talking about the stress, do you think there is a lot of talk about now K-shaped growth? What is the nature of the growth which India is witnessing? Do you think that is true? What are your
I
thoughts?
would distinguish your question into two parts. First is, in addition to large corporates, how do we see the broader corporate and business sector widen? Right. So that is one. You can't have it too fragmented either. For example, when we were having 13 telecom players, that was too many. But maybe 2 is too little, or just 2 airlines, maybe is that the right model for India? These are the questions we may want to ask. So we need some sort of a broadening, and my view is most sectors there should be at least 4, 5, 6 players with providing enough competition. If you have too many, then you see fragmentation as well. So you need to get this balance between concentration and fragmentation. No, and as far as the broader inclusion question is concerned, from the point of view of the financial inclusion, I think there are a lot of steps which have been taken to broaden it. And I think some recent data I was looking that it is getting better, but we have some journey to cross on that.
And sir, banking sector is now on a very strong footing, as of today. Any risk you foresee, and you talked about, that from savers to the investor part. So any challenges that poses for the banking industry?
So first of all, the movement when it happens from savers to investors, what it normally does, and you can see it in individual behavior. A lot of individuals have moved their monies away from deposits to investments, and particularly into equity investments, which is good because you're building risk capital. And I would support that. But along with that, it needs cutting edge governance. It needs broad-based liquidity in stocks. You should not have very low liquidity stocks or very low floats, because if more and more investors are seeing the returns coming from capital markets, you need reasonably liquid markets and not less liquid markets where shares prices can get disproportionately high because of the flow of money. So I think that's a very important aspect when you move to the investor model. Third is you have to think about the whole financial model as a two-legged model, which includes equities and debt and everything in the middle. Okay? But broadly equities and debt. So we need to figure out how we are going to ensure that debt financing of India, in addition to equity financing, can sustainably happen. We need a two-legged race, not a one-legged race.
And sir, you said about regulator that they should not be too conservative and cautious, but should respond to accident in the financial sector. Is regulators' conservatism impacting the business model of banks or the margins?
So first of all, I do believe the Indian regulatory system has done wonderfully for bringing us to where we are. And let us keep in mind, we had a backdrop post 2008 global financial crisis. And India went through a 10-year very difficult period when we saw a lot of bad debts happening. And inevitably in a democratic society, people start questioning what was happening. So the period 2010 to 2020 was an extremely difficult period for the financial sector, practitioners and regulators. And therefore, bringing the whole financial sector system to the safe shores, we have to give a lot of credit to the regulators. Therefore, I absolutely commend the regulators and the government for bringing us to safe shores. We now have to work together as practitioners and policymakers along with, and of course, regulators all together. What does it take for us to get to India to grow at 9% dollar GDP or at least 8% plus real, 7.5 to 8% plus real GDP for a sustainable growth of India? And that is the next level of challenge. So we have to manage risk, which we have done wonderfully in the last 5 years, both practitioners and regulators, and we have to aspire for sustained growth. So we have to manage both these levers together, and it's important that the policymakers, regulators and practitioners work together for a common dream for India.
One point which the government seems to be constantly doing is the heavy lifting on government investments, capital expenditure. Successive budgets have increased this thing, including the interim budget. The hope is that it will crowd in private sector investment. Do you see that happening as a banker?
I think it's getting to be better, and I think private sector is, as capacity utilizations go above 75 and 80%, it's a good time for that to expand. But that is where, as corporate India starts expanding, they will require equity and debt. And that is the key challenge for us. How are we going to be able to make sustainable growth of equity and debt? And how are we going to make both the models work, which is saver borrower and investor issuer, while having guardrails for protection of savers and investors?
And sir, you talked about the 2010 to 2020 period, and we also saw IL&FS, crisis, and you as a chairman also helped them, resolve a major part of, their debt. Any learning, for the NBFC sector or for the system, from the IL&FS crisis?
I think it was my personal view, it was a massive failure of risk management by the financial system. Okay, and first principle which I told you, if you are lending money, you must have a reasonable visibility of how it's going to come back. And I think people got very excited with infrastructure projects, particularly post 2005. And a lot of infrastructure projects were set in with very high leverage, improper takeouts, like you had power projects being set up on the basis of some in-principle letter for coal linkage and things like that. And financial underwriting should have taken care of ensuring that risk is managed when you're funding such large projects with such huge amounts and at high leverage. And then of course, the whole question is, in those days, equity raising was also difficult. Therefore, what equity was shown on the balance sheets of companies, was it real equity?
Right.
And this, I'm talking about period post 2005.
One interesting point which is now coming to the fore is the startup ecosystem, Mr. Kotak. You were a startup, in your early days of KMFL. Today, you have startups which are now listed, and big companies which have now, some of them have given good shareholder returns so far, some have not at all. Now, what are your thoughts on what the startup ecosystem needs to do as they inevitably head towards the public markets?
So I think startup ecosystem is very, very welcome. But let us also be clear that compared to established companies, they will by very nature be a little more fragile. And I would still believe we should encourage it. There may be some accidents on the road, but therefore better advice, better inputs, better regulation. But let's not try and say, because accidents have happened, let's not throw the baby with the bathwater. The startup world has a very, very positive role. I was very enthused to see that the finance ministers taking up that matter very positively to ensure that the startup ecosystem of India continues to get nurtured and flourishes. We should be ready that some mistakes will happen, but that should not throw the baby with the bathwater.
Do you think the whole model is now changing from valuation to performance? Do you see that happening
I think
across the board?
ultimately over a long period of time, it is going to be about cash flow and visibility of cash flow. In a world where interest rates are now clearly positive real rates, at the end of the day, the concept of discounted cash flow and present value of the future is going to be core to valuation.
And you talked about the interest rate, given the 4.5% inflation projection for FY25, do you see a headroom there for reducing the rates?
If the inflation is at 4.5, we could see some moderation in interest rates, and my expectation is closer towards the second half of 24-25, and we could see some moderation from the current repo rate of 6.5%. However, we should not count it too early because we are also watching what's happening globally. Okay?
The other thing, Mr. Kotak, now that you have sort of stepped back in the bank and you have a good CEO who's already in the hit the ground running. What do you see now as your role? Because you are still very young, and you had said earlier, I remember, that it's an open canvas for you right now, and that's a great place to be. You recently said you're a private citizen and you feel great about it. What is your role now at Kotak Bank, number one? And number two, what are your thoughts now as you move forward with USK Capital?
So first, let me be very clear. Till September 1, 2023, I had three roles: that of a manager, board governance member, and a significant shareholder. Significant shareholder is as a shareholder and a promoter, okay, and a founder. So founder, promoter, shareholder. So out of the three roles, from September 2, I do not have the role of a manager. I continue to be on the board as a non-executive director from a governance point of view. And that's exactly what my role is. And we are very committed long-term shareholders with our strategic stake. And we do really care about the brand and reputation, which I think the role of the board is to ensure that both the board and the management protect brand, reputation, and create sustainable value for all stakeholders, particularly shareholders. And interestingly, if shareholder value is protected, depositor value is automatically protected.
So what are the things you miss not being at the bank? I heard about this management council meeting every Monday without fail, 9:30.
No, I'm enjoying this, okay, and it depends about your mindset. So I think about this. I think there's a huge value to designing life, okay, and I feel pretty good about it. I am under no day-to-day pressure, and that's a great feeling. So and there is absolutely no anxiety of any nature. So I'm taking my time. I'm really enjoying my new position. As you can see, I'm in this office of the family, and I'm really enjoying. I'm taking every day as it comes, and I'm not over engineering life.
And at the family office, what are you painting on the canvas?
So at this point of time, we are looking at things in the medium term. I'm a believer not in quick hit and run financial trading. It doesn't excite me. About how do you build or nurture businesses and people across India. And that's something which will excite me and something which we will look at. We are in absolutely no hurry. We want to make sure companies, people grow as the India story happens. And I have just tweeted, as you have seen yesterday, I'm just amazed at the creativity power of a country called America. And how can we in India do that? I mean, at the end of the day, look at the power of the Magnificent Seven, and the movement of one NVIDIA in a day is more than India's largest market cap company, the Delta. So there is something out there which America has got right. which nurtures companies, which allows creativity, allows entrepreneurship, and allows it to flourish. I can't think about any other country in the world which compares to the US. And India, of course, has to find its own model, but at the core of that model is to create and change the world and move away from what historically has been more in the, if I take the technology world, more services model, to creating a true value add in a fast changing, transforming world.
Are you looking at in the new canvas of your future? Are you looking at particular sectors which you are particularly enthused about? Technology seems to be one of them.
I would say at this point of time, don't be prejudging what the future will be. I mean, it could be, for example, I think planet Earth is at serious existential risk, and there will have to be a business model to save planet Earth. So sustainability could be a very interesting area.
G20 you spoke about.
Who knows what is going to move the levers? And you've seen, I mean, think about companies which did not exist, whether it's an Amazon, Apple, Facebook, NVIDIA existed for a long time, but it has now taken off. Tesla, how did these companies happen? And what is the secret sauce which India can learn from to get to scale and size?
As we talk about technology, Mr. Kotak, what are your thoughts on this big, in a sense, debate which is now raging around AI? I mean, it's got its positives, of course, but it's got serious concern areas as well.
I think AI is changing the world decisively, and it's changing it in a very interesting manner. So think about a business model which was historically domain. If you knew the domain, you were successful. Then came a time of technology as an enabler to the domain. Then in many areas, the future of any company was dependent on how good engineers it had, which could program and develop things for the company. AI is changing that. AI is commoditizing product development and engineering and saying that that will be a part of a standard menu which technology companies will provide. We will have to create our own ability in the domain and use AI, and technology will be available as a plugin rather than needing to develop it yourself. So from an engineering code development, which was core to the success of many companies, to a world where that will be a package, you need to move back to domain and imagination to think about the different things the world will go to. You just got to look at chess. The machine beats any human being.
So thank you very much, Mr. Kotak. It's an absolute pleasure speaking to you as always, and many congratulations once again for the Lifetime Achievement Award. Many more milestones, I'm sure. We will wait to follow.
Thank you very much, and wish the business today all the success.
Thank you.